A vanished scientist. A tampered report. A lie beneath the surface. Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. I am your host, Samuel Drake. Drop a comment and tell us your city. Wolfe always notes the details. Your time here means more than you know. Now the case begins. It was a Tuesday, the kind that makes even a radiator seem smug. I'd just settled into my routine, coffee hot, socks matched, crossword ignored, when the doorbell buzzed like it had a grudge. Fritz, God bless his Viennese soul, was in the kitchen sautéing something that smelled like it had required a passport, so I took the hit and went to the door. The woman standing there wasn't quite what I expected. No lipstick, no perfume, no shivering sob story in her eyes, just a cardboard package in one hand and a sharp, appraising look that told me she wasn't selling anything but trouble. "Archie Goodwin?" she asked. "That's me. Is this the brownstone, or a casting call?" She didn't smile. She glanced at the package like it was ticking. "This is for Mr. Wolfe, from the Citadel Foundation. It's not to be opened by anyone else." That got my attention. The Citadel Foundation wasn't exactly the PTA. They played a significant role as grant givers, research funders, and occasionally made headlines when a donor was caught with something other than a tax receipt. Wolfe wasn't fond of institutions, especially the philanthropic kind. Too much hypocrisy, not enough garlic. "He's not exactly a fan of surprise gifts," I said. "You want to leave your name, or should I tell him it arrived by owl?" She gave the smallest shrug ever manufactured. "He'll know what it means." I took the box, medium-sized, no markings besides a typed label, for Nero Wolfe, private. The label, from CF, bore no return address. Before I could ask another question, she turned and walked off like someone whose exit was more important than her arrival. Wolfe was in the plant rooms, which meant disturbing him would either bring enlightenment or incineration. I took a gamble. He was due a disruption. He was standing among the orchids, lips pursed, hands behind his back, like an emperor surveying a blossom revolution. The humid air didn't bother him. If the place had started raining frogs, he would have complained only about the mess. "Something's come for you," I said, holding up the box like it might bite. "From the Citadel Foundation." No sender name, just initials. CF. Wolfe turned his head a few degrees, like the orchids had been replaced by a barbershop quartet. "Bring it to the office. Do not open it." I wasn't planning to boss. I like all my limbs where they are. He didn't answer. But 5 minutes later, he was in his chair, the box untouched on the desk between us, and I had a pen poised like it was a murder weapon. "I assume," he said, "you did not see who delivered it." Correction. Woman, late 30s, dark coat, lighter hair, cool as an ice bath in January. Didn't give a name, but she made sure you'd know what it meant. "I do not," Wolfe said flatly. "Want me to open it now or wait for it to hatch?" He tapped the desk. I sliced the tape. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no letterhead, typed. "It's already begun. The theft, the betrayal, the manipulation. You'll be drawn in soon enough. We trust that you'll keep your chair." Wolfe's eyes narrowed, not in fear, God forbid, but in something worse, interest. I reached into the box again. There was one more thing. A photograph, 3 men and 1 woman at a long table, smiling for a camera like they'd just solved world hunger. The backdrop displayed the text, "Citadel Foundation Annual Strategy Luncheon, May 10th. I recognized one of the faces, Dr. Raymond Burris, economist and frequent guest on late-night panels. The others, strangers, for now. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. "A strategy game then," he murmured. "So be it." And just like that, the brownstone was breached. Not by force, not by blood, but by curiosity. Which in Wolfe's case was more dangerous than either. There are 2 kinds of people who enter Nero Wolfe's brownstone. The first do so like they're walking into a cathedral, cautious, reverent, and vaguely nervous about doing something wrong. The second kind think they're in a courtroom, and they're the star witness. Neither type usually gets very far, unless Wolfe lets them. But when a man from the Citadel Foundation called that same afternoon and said he'd be arriving within the hour, and Wolfe, without so much as a grunt of protest, instructed me to let him in, I knew we weren't dealing with your average foot traffic. His name? I asked. Wolfe was seated as ever, behind his desk. His eyes were on the photograph that came with the box, the one showing 4 well-dressed smiles and a backdrop that now felt like a warning label. Mr. Lucian Brewster, he said, chairman of the Citadel Foundation's executive board. And if he is coming here without legal counsel, then this matter is more delicate than I presumed. That raised a brow. Wolfe presumed the best of them, usually in Latin. I did a bit of reading while waiting, background on Citadel's recent activities. Nothing screamed sabotage or scandal. They'd awarded a major education grant last quarter and co-hosted a symposium on international ethics. That's the kind of resume that should put you to sleep faster than warm milk. Yet someone out there thought it was enough to warrant a cryptic warning and an anonymous package. At 3:08 sharp, the doorbell rang. Lucian Brewster was about 6 feet of crisp tailoring and practiced poise, with a smile too symmetrical to be real, and a voice that said, I once gave a keynote in Geneva. He offered a firm handshake, but his eyes darted past me into the brownstone like he was expecting snipers. Mr. Wolfe is expecting you, I said, leading him through the hall. When we entered the office, Wolfe did not stand. If you've ever seen him do it, you probably dreamed about it for weeks. He did nod, barely, which was the closest thing to a welcome Lucian Brewster was going to get. Mr. Wolfe, Brewster said, placing his briefcase gently on the floor beside the chair I motioned him toward. Thank you for agreeing to see me on such short notice. You are here, Wolfe said, which suggests the matter is not merely administrative. Brewster's mouth twitched. No, it's not. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a folded envelope. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a note, handwritten in all caps. Not typed this time. Wolfe took it delicately, the way a man might take a live match from a stranger. He read it silently, eyes narrowing just a shade. Same hand, he muttered. I leaned in. Wolfe passed me the note without ceremony. It read, They know I'm going to talk. If anything happens to me, start with them. No name, no date. But written in a shaky, deliberate scrawl. I found that in my office yesterday morning, Brewster said, folded and slipped into a folder I hadn't touched since the weekend. No one claims to have seen who left it. Who is they, Mr. Brewster? Wolfe asked, and what are you planning to talk about? Brewster hesitated. He looked at me, then back to Wolfe. This is confidential. Phooey, Wolfe said with disdain. Mr. Goodwin will be present for all discussions, regardless of sensitivity. If that is an obstacle, I suggest you seek another investigator. Brewster blinked, then nodded. Very well. He laced his fingers together and exhaled. The Citadel Foundation has been under quiet internal audit for the past 3 months. Financial irregularities. Not major amounts at first, donor accounts not reconciling, expenditures without proper documentation. But the numbers have grown, and last week, one of our committee members, Dr. Elaine Markham, submitted a resignation. No reason given. She left the country the next day. I recognized the name. She was the only woman in the photograph from the luncheon. And judging by her posture in that image, she didn't seem the flight risk type. She was one of the core 4 on the Strategic Oversight Committee. Brewster continued. Along with myself, Dr. Raymond Burris, and Philip Sloan, we were the ones pictured in the photograph. That image must have been taken by someone close to us. And that, I said, is making you sweat. It should, he replied. I didn't know about the package until you mentioned it on the phone, Mr. Wolfe. But the note I brought, that's real. And it's not the only anomaly. Our central server was breached last Thursday. Files accessed. A report on our upcoming pharmaceutical grant disbursement was downloaded by an unregistered user profile. No external breach. This was internal. Someone in the Foundation? I asked. He nodded grimly. Wolfe tapped his fingers on the arm of his chair, eyes closed. Why have you not informed the authorities? Because, Brewster said quietly. This is political. We operate under the scrutiny of several governments, tax entities, and a half-dozen watchdogs. A formal scandal would be catastrophic. Not just to the Foundation, but to several of our partners. That's why I came to you. If someone inside is sabotaging us, I need to know who and why, before the headlines do. Wolfe opened his eyes. Your foundation, he said, is a monument to idealism funded by ego. Its members are likely intelligent, ambitious and frightened. I will require complete access, internal records, communication logs, and personnel files. Mr. Goodwin will conduct interviews. You will inform your colleagues of his authority. That could raise eyebrows, Brewster said. Let them rise, Wolfe snapped. You are already compromised. He shifted in his chair. Names, full names of the committee members. Brewster recited them like he was listing organ donors. Dr. Raymond Burris, lead strategist and economist. Philip Sloan, legal counsel. Elaine Markham, resigned biochemist. Myself, executive chair. And the woman who delivered the box, Wolfe asked. Brewster looked blank. What woman? A delivery, I said. Earlier today, she brought the box and didn't leave a name. No accent. Mid-30s. Brown coat, sharp eyes. It seemed like she was used to going unnoticed. Brewster shook his head. That wasn't authorized by anyone I'm aware of. That didn't surprise me. Wolfe shifted again. Very well, Mr. Goodwin will begin with Dr. Burris and Mr. Sloan. Mr. Panzer may be employed if needed. You will remain available. Brewster stood, collected his briefcase, and offered a nod that could have passed for gratitude in a dim room. I'll expect your updates, he said. Wolfe didn't answer. He was already picking up the photograph again like it held a grudge. When the door closed behind Lucy and Brewster, Wolfe spoke without looking up. Archie, tomorrow. Begin with Dr. Burris. Be courteous but thorough. He is the type who hides arrogance behind affability. You think he's our mystery manipulator? No. But he is close to the one who is. I whistled. Something tells me this one's going to get weirder, before it gets clearer. Wolfe grunted. It already has. Outside, the July heat thickened. Inside the brownstone, the sanctum, had been disturbed. Not by a murder, not yet. But at the whiff of something, Wolfe found it even more intolerable, disorder. And someone out there had made the first move. I've met a lot of characters in my time shadowing. Nero Wolfe cheaters, blackmailers, braggarts, even the occasional saint with a poorly timed conscience. But there's a special breed that comes out when money and prestige mingle behind mahogany doors. The kind of folks who read Nietzsche for breakfast and smile like they're already writing your obituary. So when I arrived at the Citadel Foundation's Midtown office the next morning, I had my best suit on, my notepad ready, and both eyes peeled. The Foundation's headquarters occupied the entire 22nd floor of a glass and steel high-rise that screamed legitimacy with a touch of smug. The receptionist, all bone structure and neutral tones, checked her list and gave me a professional smile that didn't reach her pupils. I'll let Dr. Burris know you're here. She led me through a hallway, decorated with plaques, portraits, and abstract art I suspected cost more than my car. I was ushered into a corner office, where Raymond Burris stood behind a glass desk the size of Rhode Island. He extended his hand like a man who believed in the importance of a powerful handshake, but had read about it in a leadership book, rather than learned it from a father. "Mr. Goodwin, a pleasure. Let's not rush it," I said. "I'm here on behalf of Nero Wolfe. We've been asked to look into certain things, oddities." His lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Mr. Brewster is a cautious man. That's not a criticism. The Foundation operates in a world of large numbers and larger reputations. Paranoia is unfortunately a job requirement." "Do paranoia and disappearing biochemists go hand in hand?" I asked. He gave me the practiced pause of a man who wanted to seem thoughtful. Dr. Markham's resignation came as a surprise, but not a scandal. She was brilliant, certainly, but private, disengaged from politics. She wasn't interested in the prestige culture, as she once put it. Her departure wasn't the first, it won't be the last. She didn't say anything before she left. Didn't seem spooked. Didn't suggest she was planning a vacation on another continent. Burris shook his head slowly. Nothing more than her standard aloofness. But I would suggest speaking to Philip Sloan. He was closest to her, professionally of course. I made a note of it. Burris watched me with the kind of interest usually reserved for test subjects and chess opponents. "Tell me something," I said. "Do you know anything about a breach of your internal files last week?" A tiny crease formed between his eyebrows. "I do now. Mr. Brewster mentioned it briefly. I understand it was contained. That depends on what was accessed. Any idea who might benefit from digging around in your digital closets?" He leaned back. "Anyone with ambition and access. That includes everyone on the Strategic Oversight Committee. Even me if you're feeling theatrical. But if you want motivation, you'll find it where the money moves. Follow the grants." The pharmaceutical disbursement program was contentious from the start. One of our donors was pushing for recipients tied to a specific lab network. There were debates. What kind of debates? The kind that get logged politely in minutes but screamed about in private emails. I nodded. Burris wasn't giving away the store, but he was opening a few windows. I spent another 15 minutes asking and listening, but nothing in his tone rang urgent. No twitch, no tells. The guy was a poker face with a vocabulary. But Wolfe had said arrogance hid behind affability, and Burris was practically wrapped in it. Philip Sloan, the Foundation's general counsel, was my next stop. Judging from his office clutter and 3 coffee mugs, he seemed to be driven by deadlines and caffeine. He greeted me with a distracted nod and gestured to the visitor chair as he simultaneously typed something into a monitor. "Sorry, trying to finish a draft for our ethics review committee. Brewster said someone from Wolfe's office would be coming." "Glad to be anticipated," I said. "I'm looking into a couple of peculiar events around here. Disappearing biochemists. Anonymous warnings. Unauthorized file access. You wouldn't happen to have a theory or two?" He finished typing, turned, and ran a hand through his hair like he hadn't slept well in a month. "I have theories about everything. Comes with the JD. But if you're asking whether I think someone's out to sabotage the Foundation, I'd say, maybe. More likely, someone's playing defense. Trying to bury something before it stinks. Any chance that something involves Dr. Markham?" His expression didn't change, but he leaned forward an inch. "She was under a lot of pressure. We were revising the research grants policy, and Elaine had strong views about which projects deserved funding. Let's just say not everyone appreciated her candor." "Define not everyone."
He hesitated. Dr. Burris, for one. He didn't appreciate her questioning his economic modeling. They clashed more than once during strategy meetings. And there were rumors, someone trying to push funding through for a biotech partnership. She had raised flags about. Specifics. He shook his head. Elaine didn't leave breadcrumbs. She believed in confidentiality, even when it was inconvenient. What about you? You two were close, I hear. A shadow flickered across his face. I admired her. She had integrity. And in this business, that's rarer than it should be. I let that sit for a moment. Sloane had the earnest look of a man who believed in ideals, even while billing by the hour. Whether that made him naive or dangerous, I hadn't decided. On the way out, I asked the receptionist for access to staff rosters and internal organizational charts. She offered a nervous smile and said someone would email them. I wasn't holding my breath. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was at his desk, reading a monograph on West African pepper cultivation, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. I briefed him about the situation. Burris was cool and polished, Sloane was twitchy and loyal, and Markham was still just a silhouette with a suitcase. He listened with eyes closed and fingers steepled. When I finished, he nodded once. Mr. Sloane is conflicted. Not deceitful, but burdened. Doctor. Burris is not to be trusted with assumptions. His surface is polished for a reason. We must consider the possibility that Elaine Markham left not of her volition, but under pressure, or threat. You think someone scared her off? I think Wolfe said that if someone tampered with Citadel's records, accessed classified grant material, and then delivered an anonymous threat to Mr. Brewster's office, we are not witnessing simple financial impropriety. We are witnessing a concealed betrayal. One calculated, deliberate and strategic. He paused, and it has not yet finished unfolding. I nodded. So what's next? Wolfe opened his eyes. Miss Carla Dunn, Communications Director. She appears in several recent press photos with the Strategic Committee and was present at the May luncheon. You will find her, ask about internal tensions, and observe her carefully. I made a note. And after that, Wolfe allowed himself a small sigh. Then we wait. The next move will not be subtle. It is never subtle when someone has already risked so much. He reached for a glass of beer. Fritz had placed silently by his elbow. Outside, Manhattan hummed its usual tune. But inside the foundation, and now our brownstone, the melody was shifting. Someone was composing a symphony of misdirection, and we had just begun to hear the first movement. You can't trust anyone whose job title includes the word communications and doesn't involve radios. That's not paranoia. It's experience. People who control messaging for a living tend to massage the truth the way a sculptor shapes clay until it looks presentable, symmetrical, and absolutely nothing like what it started as. So when Wolfe sent me after Carla Dunn, Citadel Foundation's Director of Communications, I braced myself for lacquered charm, a curated narrative, and possibly a very firm no comment. I tracked her down 2 days after my conversation with Sloane. She was giving a tour of Citadel's media annex to a pair of international donors, both of whom were dressed like aristocrats from 2 different continents, and nodded politely, while Carla spoke in flawless unbroken paragraphs about vision alignment and synergistic transparency. The moment she noticed me, her eyes flicked with polite alarm, like spotting a smudge on an otherwise clean mirror. I waited until the tour wrapped, then approached with a grin and a business card. Miss Dunn, Archie Goodwin, I'd like a few minutes of your time. Strictly off the record for now. Her smile never faltered. Mr. Goodwin, I've heard you can be persistent. I try to stay fit. She led me to her office, sleek, neutral, not a trace of clutter, and gestured toward a visitor chair, as if we were about to discuss mutual funds, not internal sabotage. So she began. Lucien brought in Nero Wolfe. That's serious. More than he's letting on, I said. And considering someone's been snooping through confidential grant files, resigning without farewells, and leaving cryptic notes like they're auditioning for a Cold War thriller, I'd say serious might be the right tone. She sat, crossed her legs, and clasped her hands over one knee. I don't handle internal audits or file security. That's compliance. But I can tell you that people here are nervous. And when people get nervous, they start imagining shadows. Did that shadow ever include Dr. Markham? Carla's eyes narrowed, just slightly. Elaine was brilliant, driven, also very cautious. She didn't like the recent shift in Citadel's partnerships. She felt we were compromising scientific integrity for political alignment. She told me once that we were being bought by credibility brokers. Did she tell you who was buying? No, but I have my suspicions. She leaned forward. Citadel's pharmaceutical grant program. The expansion was fast-tracked. I handled the press releases. Brewster insisted it was a milestone. But Elaine didn't sign off on the data validations. There was an email chain, long and tense, between her and Dr. Burris, about omitted trial results and revised language in a funding summary. And she left right after that. She left after her access to several internal files was restricted. That was the final straw. I wrote that down. Did she confide in anyone? Besides you? Maybe Sloan. He always had a soft spot for her. But I think she didn't want to implicate him, or anyone, unless she had proof. Carla stood, walked over to her desk, and opened a drawer. She took out a thin blue folder, and handed it to me. I kept a copy of one of her reports. She'd submitted it with a recommendation to halt a funding release to a firm called Regine Bio. It didn't go through. The next day, that report vanished from the digital archive. I opened the folder. It was dense but readable. Elaine's language was clear. Concerns over clinical data inconsistencies, missing peer reviews, and an unacceptable risk of public exposure, should the findings be challenged. She told me she feared someone had buried it, maybe to preserve a deal that shouldn't have passed scrutiny. I closed the folder and looked at Carla. Why are you giving this to me now? Because I believe in what Citadel's supposed to stand for. And because someone inside this place is more interested in optics than truth. I thanked her and left with the folder under my arm and a few new names swimming in my head. Regine Bio had just entered the conversation, and that meant we weren't just dealing with disappearing files or frightened board members. We were dealing with biotech money. The kind that doesn't walk away from a fight. I stopped at a cafe on 42nd to read the report again and call Wolfe with the update. He answered with a grunt, his version of go ahead. When I relayed Carla's statement and the file she gave me, Wolfe didn't interrupt. That alone told me he was interested. Regine Bio, I said. Sounds like a company with too many lawyers and not enough oversight. There is always oversight, Wolfe replied. The question is, whose? I returned to the brownstone early that evening. Wolfe was in the office, glass of beer in hand, dictionary open beside him, like a half-finished conversation. I dropped the folder on his desk. He flipped through the first page. His lips compressed. That was Wolfe speak for well. This file, he murmured, was never meant to resurface. And Carla Dunn's the first person who's actually told us something useful. I said, she is useful, Wolfe agreed, but also calculating. She plays multiple sides, if only to remain upright between them. Think she's protecting herself. She's preserving her options. If this matter turns, she intends to land on the winning side. I took a seat. So what now? Now, Wolfe said. You find out who authorized the Regine Bio grant. Not who signed it. Who pushed for it. That gave me a direction. I spent the next day following paper trails and charm-based questioning. I got lucky at a regulatory liaison's office downtown, where a senior analyst remembered a rushed request to clear a late-phase clinical partnership with Regine Bio. That request had come indirectly from someone connected to the foundation's legal arm. The contact name, Philip Sloan. I brought that back to Wolfe. Sloan, he said, not surprised. He has a motive. To shield the foundation. To shield the foundation. To shield himself. But Carla said he and Elaine were close. Yes, which means if he was compromised, it pained him. People do irrational things when loyalty and fear meet. He paused, tapping the side of the folder. Arrange a meeting with Sloan. Here, at the brownstone. Say it's routine. I will observe. You will question. Standard bait. Subtle bait. We must not provoke panic. Not yet. That evening, I called Sloan. He agreed to come the next day. Polite, curious, and unaware that his name had just moved to the center of Wolfe's mental game board. But something else happened that night. Around midnight, I was finishing a report in the front room when I heard movement near the kitchen. Fritz had long since turned in, and Wolfe was surely upstairs in his room. I followed the sound, soft, deliberate, and reached the pantry, just in time to see the narrow door to the wine cellar closing. I descended quickly and quietly. No sign of anyone, but on the floor, near the far shelf, one of Wolfe's rare spice jars, hand-labeled, Algerian, coriander, lay on its side, open. Wolfe wouldn't misplace it. Someone had been inside the brownstone, and they weren't there for wine. I replaced the jar, double-checked the locks, and went upstairs, and they weren't there for wine. I replaced the jar, double-checked the locks, and went upstairs. When I told Wolfe the next morning, he said nothing for a moment. Then, they're escalating. Think it was Sloan? No, he is too burdened. This was someone, later, bolder. Someone is testing us. I looked around the room. The brownstone wasn't just disturbed anymore. It had been trespassed. And Wolfe never forgot a trespass. And Wolfe never forgot a trespass. In the brownstone, there are rules. Some written, most not. Fritz owns the kitchen. I own the hallway gossip. And Wolfe owns everything else, including the silence. So when something gets moved without permission, especially in Wolfe's pantry, it's not a small entry. It's not a small thing. It's a declaration, like poking a bear with a stick and betting on the bear's dad. The jar of Algerian coriander that had been disturbed the night before wasn't just rare. It was Wolfe's personal acquisition. Was Wolfe's personal acquisition. Sealed in a custom glass vial and placed on the third shelf behind lesser spices to avoid tampering. Fritz wouldn't touch it without instruction. I wouldn't dream of it. So unless Wolfe had developed sleepwalking habits or had become exceptionally generous with his seasoning, it meant someone had not only broken into the exceptionally generous with his seasoning. It meant someone had not only broken into the brownstone, but also knew where to look. The next morning, I gave Wolfe the full breakdown, over eggs, toast, and silence.
Wolfe summoned him into the office and gestured to the chair opposite his own. "You will locate Dr. Elaine Markham," he said, discreetly. "No official channels. I believe she left because she was told to, not because she chose to." Saul nodded. "Any leads?" "Last known credit card activity was in Geneva, Switzerland, 6 days ago," I added, "but no formal re-entry to the US since." "Start there," Wolfe said, "and stay out of sight." Saul left without another word, and Wolfe returned to his desk with a calm that was just a little too calm. That was his version of putting up the storm shutters. The next item on our calendar was the meeting with Philip Sloane. He arrived just after 5, looking more frayed than before, tie crooked, smile thinner, eyes darting like he'd just walked out of a long argument with himself. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. I ushered Sloane in, offered him a drink, which he declined, and watched as Wolfe directed him to the red chair, what I like to call the confession seat. Sloane sat like a man prepared to talk, but unsure which version of the truth would do the least damage. "Mr. Sloane," Wolfe began, "we've spoken to your colleagues, reviewed the internal structures of the Citadel Foundation, and examined documentation connected to the Regine Bio grant. I will not ask you why you helped approve it. I will ask you when you realized it was a mistake." Sloane stiffened. "That's a heavy presumption." "It is," Wolfe said calmly, "but not unfounded. The push to fast-track Regine Bio's funding required internal legal clearance. That clearance came from you. I only signed off based on available data. The available data," Wolfe said, "was flagged as flawed by Dr. Markham, and a report she submitted, opposing the disbursement, was deleted from the archive, conveniently." Sloane hesitated. I watched his throat move in a dry swallow. "I didn't delete it," he said, "but I knew it had been buried. I didn't fight it." "Why?" Wolfe asked. Not loudly, just cleanly. "Because I was told it was done. The decision had been made. Burris said the report was an unnecessary complication. That would stall the grant and cause blowback from the donors who've already committed to Regine Bio. And that didn't strike you as inconveniently expedient." Sloane exhaled slowly. "Of course it did. But I didn't have proof, only suspicion. And then Elaine left. No explanation. No goodbye. I took that as my warning." "She trusted you," I said quietly. "She left because someone didn't want her there anymore. You could have done something." His eyes flared with guilt, but he didn't argue. "I know. That's why I came here today. Because something isn't right." "What isn't right, Mr. Sloane," Wolfe said, "is that someone entered my home without invitation, tampered with a symbol of order, and believes they will not be held accountable." Sloane blinked. "Wait, someone came here." "Yes," Wolfe said, "and that tells me we are closer than they'd like." Sloane looked genuinely shaken. I observed that, but I didn't fully trust his reaction. Guilt makes a good actor. After he left, Wolfe motioned for me to shut the door. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "I believe Carla Dunn knows who entered the brownstone." "That's a leap," I said. "No, it's a deduction. She handed you Elaine's report, but not the email thread that prompted it. Which means she's holding a piece back, perhaps out of self-preservation, or out of fear. She's not the type to scare easily. She's the type to hedge her bets. That makes her dangerous and useful." He tapped the desk. "Tomorrow, you will return to Carla. Mention the break-in. Watch her response. Do not ask directly. Let her reveal what she thinks we know. And if she gives us nothing, she will," Wolfe said, eyes narrowing. "Because whoever entered this house was confident enough to do so without causing chaos. Which means they believe they are still in control." He stood, just slightly, just long enough to step toward the globe near the window. It was a rare movement, one that meant his blood was up. "But they are mistaken," he said. "Control belongs to me now." That night, I checked all the locks again. Not because I was afraid, because Wolfe wasn't. And that meant someone else should be. There's a tone people get when they think they're still in control. It's not arrogance, exactly. It's quieter than that. Like a piano playing a little too perfectly in a room you didn't ask to be in. Carla Dunn had that tone when she handed me Elaine Markham's buried report. But now that someone had trespassed into Wolfe's pantry without tripping over so much as a doormat, we were past the point of subtle performances. Wolfe had given me my instructions. Go back to Carla. Mention the intrusion, but not directly. Let her think we knew more than we did. And let her fill in the rest by accident. She was in the media suite again when I arrived. This time she was alone, standing in front of a digital board reviewing mock-ups for an upcoming press release. I knocked on the open door frame. She looked up with a blink of surprise, then a measured smile. "Mr. Goodwin, I was wondering when you'd resurface. I tend to resurface when people start moving spices around in Mr. Wolfe's house." That earned me a pause, short, barely visible, but there. "Excuse me, you heard me," I said, stepping into the room. Somebody came in. They didn't take anything, didn't even leave a smudge, just rearranged one item that meant something. And now we're wondering who would do such a thing. She turned back to her board, clicking through images with calm fingers. "Are you implying I had something to do with that?" "I'm implying you might know who would." She clicked once more. A scenic lab shot vanished. "Mr. Goodwin, I don't operate in the shadows. If I had something to say, I'd say it." "Would you?" I asked. "Because you gave me Elaine's report." "Sure. But not the correspondence that got her worked up enough to write it. Wolfe thinks you're keeping something back." Carla closed the screen slowly. "Elaine sent me the emails the night before she resigned. She was scared. She didn't say why, but I could tell. She told me, if anything happened, I should trust my instincts. Your instincts tell you who's behind this." She nodded. "Once. I think it's Burris. Not directly, but he's facilitating something. There's too much pressure on him from certain donors, big donors. He's the one who insisted Regine Bio be positioned as a priority. He even drafted language for the press kit before the grant was approved. That's not procedure, that's coordination. And you sat on this. Why? Because I needed to be sure, and because the moment I speak out, I lose my job, maybe more." I leaned forward slightly. "So now that someone's been inside our house, does that make you more sure?" Carla didn't answer, but she opened a drawer and handed me a flash drive. It has the full chain, Elaine's objections, Burris's edits, even a private message from one of the advisory donors. He warned Burris to neutralize dissent or risk losing the deal. You'll recognize the language when you read it. Neutralize dissent. Sounds like something out of a boardroom thriller. "It is," she said softly. "But this one's real." I took the drive and gave her a long look. "Keep your phone close. If Wolfe has more questions, he'll want you here in person." She nodded, and for once didn't have a comeback. I took the long way back to the brownstone, in part because I wanted to make sure no one was following me, and in part because I needed air. When you work with Wolfe long enough, you learn to detect tension not by what's said, but by what isn't. And right now, there was a lot unsaid between our suspects. By the time I got back, Wolfe was already seated at his desk with a glass of beer and a bowl of cold beef consommé Fritz had insisted wasn't technically dinner. I handed him the flash drive, and he inserted it into the laptop with the care of someone lighting a fuse. For the next 30 minutes, he read. He didn't speak, he didn't even grunt. And when Wolfe goes quiet for that long, you know something in his head is snapping into place. I watched over his shoulder. The email trail was dense but illuminating. Burris had downplayed Elaine's objections, while simultaneously assuring a donor, someone listed only as RV in the private chain, that the grant would proceed as expected. Elaine's messages had grown increasingly urgent. The final one simply read, "This will not hold up. I cannot sign off on this. If this proceeds, someone will be held accountable." Wolfe closed the file, exhaled once, then looked up at me. "We are nearly there. That donor," I said. "RV, we don't know who that is." "No, but we will." He reached for the phone and dialed Saul Panzer. When Saul answered, Wolfe gave instructions quickly and clearly. "Elaine Markham, Geneva. Follow any transactions, find the hotel, and the contacts. She may be in contact with someone inside Citadel. If so, I must know who." He hung up and swiveled back to me. "We now know that Burris acted on behalf of an outside influence. He tried to discredit Elaine, and as a result, her report was removed at his behest. We also know someone is attempting to dissuade us with veiled threats.
but they've overplayed their hand. I raised an eyebrow. How so? By entering my house, he said simply. That was emotional, not strategic, and it suggests someone is losing their balance. Just then, the front doorbell rang. I checked my watch. It was after 9, late for visitors, early for trouble. I opened the door. It was Lucian Brewster, and he didn't look pleased. I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe, he said. Now. I let him in, and guided him to the office. Wolfe didn't rise, but his eyes were already scanning Brewster's tense posture. You were not invited, Wolfe said. I know, but something's happened. Wolfe motioned for him to continue. There's been a break-in at the Citadel data center, physical breach. They bypassed security, got into a restricted archive, and accessed legacy audit files. No damage, nothing stolen, but we found a copy of Elaine Markham's report, printed and left on the table. I whistled low. Bold move, I said. Message received. That's the thing, Brewster said. I don't know if it was a warning, or a confession. Wolfe's eyes narrowed, or both. Brewster nodded once, then looked from Wolfe to me. I think whoever's behind this is getting nervous and desperate. You are correct, Wolfe said, and that makes them more dangerous than ever. He stood then, not fully, just enough to reach for the switch that turned on the overhead light with a low click. A signal. We are done waiting, he said. Mr. Goodwin, assemble the Strategic Oversight Committee. Here, tomorrow night, every member. You want to do the big reveal. I want them in the room, all of them. There will be no more notes, no more disappearances. We will draw the curtain. Lucian Brewster exhaled, as if he'd just run a mile in shoes not made for running. May I ask, what are you going to do? Wolfe turned to him, with the faintest edge of a smile. I am going to ask questions, Mr. Brewster. He sat back down. And I am going to listen very carefully to how they are answered. If you've never seen Nero Wolfe set a trap, it's not the sort of thing you notice right away. He doesn't bang the cage door shut, or wave the bait in the air. He simply waits, lets the air get still, lets the questions accumulate like snow on a roof, and when the wait's just right, someone steps through the door thinking they're still free. Then Wolfe leans back, lifts an eyebrow, and lets gravity handle the rest. The next morning, we began preparing the office. Wolfe had requested, in no uncertain terms, that the entire Strategic Oversight Committee, from the Citadel Foundation report to the brownstone at 7 p.m. sharp. No phone-ins, no postponements. He made it sound like a courtesy. It wasn't. Every chair is in place, he said to me, over breakfast. Fritz will serve nothing but iced tea and water. I will not allow stimulants to blur judgment. They're not being cross-examined in court, I said. No, Wolfe replied. They're being cross-examined by me. I prefer them clear-headed. By noon Saul Panzer had called in with an update. Elaine Markham was still in Geneva, staying at a modest private inn near the Botanical Gardens. She had withdrawn a sizable sum in cash 2 days after her resignation, and had recently met with someone matching Carla Dunn's description, though traveling under an alias. She's not hiding, Saul said. She's biding time, waiting for someone to either vindicate her or bury the whole thing. She'll have her answer by tonight, Wolfe said. Then he hung up without so much as a goodbye. Around 4:30, I took another call, this one from Carla. Her voice was calm but tight. Are you sure this meeting tonight is a good idea? I don't schedule the meetings, Miss Dunn. Wolfe does. I just buy the cookies we don't serve. If Burris suspects anything, he'll turn defensive. Wolfe's counting on it, I said. At 6 sharp, Fritz laid out the glasses and the pitchers of water and tea with his usual precision. Wolfe reviewed the seating one more time. 4 guests, Burris Sloane, Carla Dunn, and Brewster. Each one would be seated directly across from Wolfe, with just enough space between them to keep things civil, and just enough tension to make things interesting. The doorbell rang at 6:48. First through the door was Sloane, dressed like he'd come from a funeral, and looking like he might be attending another one by the end of the night. I greeted him, took his coat, and offered him a seat in the front room while we waited. He declined the drink, as expected. Next was Brewster, punctual, polite, and visibly strained. I led him into the office early, where Wolfe acknowledged him with a brief nod. No conversation, not yet. Carla arrived 2 minutes later, hair up, no makeup, wearing a muted grey pantsuit that said she was ready to be underestimated. I gave her a small nod, which she returned without a word. Burris was last. He strolled in at exactly 7:01, all polished smiles and smooth handshakes, the kind of man who'd bring a bottle of wine to a confrontation and suggest pairings for the accusations. He didn't seem nervous. He seemed prepared. That was either excellent acting or a very real belief that he had nothing to worry about. Once they were all seated, Wolfe began, not with fanfare, not with theatrics, just stillness. He looked at each of them, one by one, and let the room grow quiet. Then he spoke. I have asked you here because there has been a breach, not only of security, but of trust. Documents have been altered, access has been misused, and reputations, perhaps lives, have been endangered by decisions made without scrutiny. I will not tolerate evasion. I will not accept indifference. You will speak plainly. Brewster shifted in his chair. Sloane avoided everyone's gaze. Carla looked like she was ready for a fight. Burris, he smiled. Still. Let's begin, Wolfe said. Mr. Sloane, you approved the Regine Bio grant, despite objections from Dr. Markham. Why? I was pressured, Sloane said, voice quiet. Not directly, but the internal push was overwhelming, and I believed it would stabilize the Foundation's external image. Who pressured you? Sloane hesitated. Dr. Burris. Burris's smile flickered. I never applied pressure, he said. I advocated for a decision. That's what the committee does. We discuss, we debate. You drafted the press release before the grant was finalized, Wolfe said. Burris spread his hands. That's the procedure. Communications gets early drafts to prepare statements in advance. Wolfe shifted to Carla. Miss Dunn, did Dr. Burris provide you with the Regine Bio statement? Carla nodded. 2 days before the vote. Was Elaine Markham's dissent mentioned? No. Wolfe turned back to Burris. You also received a message from a donor, listed as RV, who instructed you to neutralize dissent. Care to explain? Burris didn't blink. Donors often push boundaries. That doesn't mean we obey them. Yet you did. No, Burris said evenly. I made a judgment call. Markham's concerns were speculative. The data passed review. Because you redacted the flag trials. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious offense. Burris leaned forward now, finally letting the smile drop. This sounds like a tribunal. It's a clarification, Wolfe said, of responsibility and culpability. I watched Carla then. Her expression hadn't changed, but her hands had tightened slightly in her lap. Wolfe wasn't done. I will make this plain. Someone entered this house without permission. A deliberate trespass, a provocation, a message. I do not yet know which of you orchestrated it, but I do know who benefited from it. He turned to Carla. You brought Elaine's report to me. You claimed moral duty, but you withheld the full email thread. Until recently, you said you feared for your job. That was only half true. Carla's eyes narrowed. I shared what I could. You shared what protected you, Wolfe said. You also contacted Elaine after she left. You arranged a meeting with her in Geneva, a meeting not cleared through the Foundation. That's irrelevant. It's highly relevant, Wolfe said, because you were negotiating, not for truth, for position. You think I'm behind this, Carla snapped. I think, Wolfe said, that you saw an opportunity. Burris was too compromised. Sloane was too weak. Elaine was too righteous. You thought perhaps if you helped control the narrative, you could survive the fallout. Carla opened her mouth, then closed it. Then Wolfe turned, at last, to Burris. You, however, believed you could manage this, that you could steer the grant approval, pacify Elaine, discredit her when necessary, and push forward with a plan that served your patrons. Burris met Wolfe's gaze. I've done what I was paid to do. I've preserved this foundation's future. By erasing the past, Wolfe said. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Wolfe concluded, you will all remain available. I will contact the appropriate authorities tomorrow. This matter will not be buried. Brewster cleared his throat. You intend to go public. I intend to ensure no one else is buried beneath it. He stood. You may go. One by one they left. Sloane first, head bowed. Brewster second, silent and resigned. Carla hesitated, gave me a look that said a lot, and nothing at once, and disappeared into the hallway. Burris lingered. He looked at Wolfe for a long moment. You can't prove it was me in your house. No, Wolfe said. But I can prove who told you what was there. Burris's smile didn't return this time. Then he left, and the room at last was quiet. Wolfe sat, adjusted the orchid on his desk, and said, Tomorrow, Mr. Goodwin, we begin the real cleanup. And tonight, he sighed, long and slow, tonight we have earned silence. The next morning arrived like a whisper after thunder. The office, which had hosted a verbal battlefield just hours earlier, was back to its usual silence. Sunlight on the rug, Fritz in the kitchen, preparing eggs with a meditative focus, and Wolfe in his chair with his lips pressed tighter than usual. I didn't say anything right away. Wolfe wasn't one for recaps over breakfast, and I didn't need a gold star to know we were closing in. He'd let the suspects speak, expose their angles, and tangle their own alibis in front of each other. It was classic Wolfe: set the stage, light the fuse, and let their egos do the rest. But we weren't quite done. Wolfe, I said after finishing the last of my coffee, you said today, we begin the real cleanup. What's left? Burris practically admitted to burying Elaine's report. Carla's maneuvering for survival. Sloane's a guilt sponge. Brewster wants to vanish. We've got the emails, the grant documents, and the donor pressure. Wolfe didn't look up from his desk. All circumstantial, he said. Enough to stir the scandal, not enough to bind guilt. You think the authorities won't care about tampered reports and whispered donor threats? They will care, Wolfe said, finally setting his book aside. But they will hesitate, unless someone confesses, or unless someone breaks. I leaned back in my chair. You're not done pressing them. No, he said. We've only primed them. Now we pull the knot tight. It turned out Wolfe had already planned the second act of his little gathering. Not with a formal summons this time, but a simple message through Brewster's office. He would be making a closing inquiry that evening. All four would attend. Refusal, as Wolfe phrased it, would be interpreted as a professional abdication. Not a threat, exactly, but close enough that no one would dare ignore it. I spent the day checking details. Saul confirmed that Elaine Markham was prepared to speak, if requested. She had the full records of her review, and more importantly, she'd found discrepancies between the data the committee had seen and what Regine Bio had published afterward. Their trial numbers were inflated, Saul said, deliberately. Elaine flagged it, but they kept the false figures in the draft. Burris presented. That was the motive, all right. But Wolfe didn't want a motive. He wanted a method, and tonight, he'd get it. By 6:45, everyone had arrived. No fanfare this time, no small talk. Sloane sat like a man under judgment. Carla, cool and controlled, avoided looking at anyone. Brewster kept his jaw clenched, and Burris, well, he looked like he'd memorized a rebuttal, and was just waiting for the podium. Wolfe opened with no preamble. This meeting is for resolution. You've all spoken your piece. You've all seen the consequences. Now we will discuss what is yet unspoken. He looked to Sloane first. You approved a grant you knew was contested. Sloane nodded, eyes down. Yes, you did so under pressure. Yes. From Dr. Burris. A pause. Then quietly, "Yes." Wolfe turned to Carla. "You withheld information." "I did," she said evenly. "Why?" "To survive. I thought if I played neutral, I could help Elaine without going under myself. Do you still think that?" She hesitated. "No." Wolfe nodded once, then turned to Burris. "You have maneuvered through this entire scandal with practiced detachment. You've deflected responsibility, blurred timelines, and relied on plausible deniability. But you made one mistake." Burris lifted an eyebrow. "Oh." Wolfe lifted a sheet of paper, the access log from the brownstone pantry. "Our system recorded a single digital ping at 11:37 p.m., the night of the intrusion, not from an external network, but from a device previously connected through our guest Wi-Fi. That device belonged to you." The smile on Burris's face thinned. "I left my phone here briefly last week. That proves nothing." "It proves proximity," Wolfe said. "But what proves intent is this." He held up a photograph. It showed Burris outside Carla's building 2 days before the pantry incident. Wolfe handed it to Carla. "You told me you hadn't seen him recently, but this was after your meeting with Elaine. You didn't mention it." Carla's lips parted. "I didn't know he'd followed me. I didn't follow her." Burris cut in. Wolfe raised a hand. "Miss Dunn gave me a flash drive with Elaine's documentation, but she kept the originals. The copies had metadata stripped. Only someone who knew what to look for could request that, and someone who wanted no trail." He turned to Brewster. "You found a printed version of Elaine's report at your data center. That was not a warning. It was a statement, a demonstration of reach." Burris left it there. Brewster started. "Why? To intimidate? Or to provoke?" "Possibly both, but mostly to reset the narrative, before the committee could collapse under scrutiny." Burris chuckled softly. "You have quite a flair, Mr. Wolfe. But you're wrong." "I rarely am," Wolfe replied. "And even if I were, the conclusion remains. You orchestrated a campaign of suppression. You manipulated records, undermined a colleague's reputation, and endangered the Foundation's integrity, all for the sake of appeasing a donor, whose identity you refused to disclose." "I disclosed nothing," Burris said. "No," Wolfe said. "But RV did. Mr. Goodwin." I stood and read from the note that had arrived that morning by courier. "Anonymous return, sealed envelope, asterisk, asterisk. To whom it may concern, Raymond Burris acted under our advice but without authorization. He misrepresented the Foundation's process, and used our name as leverage to influence decisions. We regret the pressure he applied, and will fully cooperate with any inquiry. RV."
Say.
That landed like a dropped suitcase. Sloane's head sank. Carla exhaled. Brewster's hand trembled. And Burris, he laughed. "Once. Of course. They always turn when the heat gets close." "Then you admit it?" Wolfe asked. Burris's voice hardened. "I admit I played the game. The Foundation plays it every day. I just happen to be better at it. Until now." "Thank you," Wolfe said. "That will do." Burris stood, straightened his coat, and walked out without another word. The others remained seated, as if unsure what came next.
Wolfe looked at Brewster. "The Foundation must decide whether to recover or retreat. The evidence will be forwarded to your board. Miss Markham is willing to speak publicly, if needed." Brewster gave a slow, grave nod. "She should." Wolfe dismissed them one by one. Sloane last, with a gesture that was almost gentle. When the office was empty again, Wolfe didn't move. He sat in silence, gazing at the orchids near the window. Then he spoke. "Power without principle is always temporary." I nodded. "Nicely said." "It was not meant to be nice," he replied. Then, almost as an afterthought, he looked at me. "Dinner, Archie. Coming right up." And with that, the brownstone returned to stillness. The spice jar remained untouched. And for now, so did the peace. Some detectives spring their traps with a bang. Sirens, confessions, gunfire in a dark hallway. Wolfe doesn't deal in bangs. He deals in weight. And last night, when Raymond Burris walked out of the brownstone with his spine straight and his legacy folding in on itself, the weight had finally settled. Quietly, precisely. No theatrics, just gravity. But Wolfe wasn't finished. Not yet. He'd always said that deduction without consequence was worse than no deduction at all. And with the evidence gathered, the confessions unearthed, and the guilty parties exposed, it was time for the final turn of the screw. The next morning started like most in the brownstone: eggs, toast, and Fritz muttering Viennese wisdom over the stove. Wolfe took his beer and his silence in equal measure, and I waited. Not because I had anything left to say, but because I knew Wolfe did. He spoke as I was folding my second napkin. "The foundation will survive," he said, "but not unchanged. You think Brewster will act?" "Yes. He has no choice. Public sentiment, donor pressure, reputational collapse. He will present the board with a clean-up narrative. Burris as the rogue operative. Carla as the reformist insider. Sloan as the troubled conscience. He will let Elaine return, if she desires, and she will be lauded as the whistleblower who tried to save the ship." "And Wolfe?" I asked. "Where do we fit in that narrative?" "We don't," he said. "We were never meant to. And that is as it should be." He stood then, an event in itself, and moved to the window where the orchid sat glowing in the morning light. "There remains one final matter," he said, without turning. I waited. "You have a visitor." Fritz called from the hallway a few minutes later, "A Miss Markham." That made Wolfe turn. Elaine Markham entered the office with the composure of someone who'd watched an empire crumble and hadn't yet decided whether to mourn it. She wore a charcoal jacket, carried a slim leather bag, and nodded to Wolfe with the grace of a scientist who knew the value of stillness. "Mr. Wolfe." "Mr. Goodwin." "Doctor," Wolfe said. She sat in the chair where so many others had buckled over the last few days. But she didn't fidget, didn't blink, just looked at Wolfe straight on. "You have my thanks," she said. Wolfe inclined his head. "You were the catalyst. We only provided structure." She nodded once. "I assume Carla told you we met." "She did. And I assume you've seen the news." "I have. Burris has been removed from all positions. The Foundation issued a statement citing procedural discrepancies and unilateral decision-making. They're trying to salvage their faces. That's the purpose of a face," Wolfe said dryly. "To be salvaged." Elaine smiled faintly. "They've offered me a position, a new one. Oversight of ethical review. You'll take it?" "I haven't decided." "May I recommend that you do?" Wolfe said. "With conditions, and with scrutiny. You are not finished with them. They are not finished with themselves." She leaned back slightly, and for a moment, her eyes softened. "I didn't expect anyone to take this seriously. I thought once I left, they'd bury it all." "Some things resist burial," Wolfe said, "especially when planted in fertile ground." She looked at me. "And you, Mr. Goodwin, what's your take?" "I think you were smarter than the rest of them," I said. "Which made you dangerous." "That's not a compliment, is it?" "Not always," I said. "But in this case it kept the place from falling apart." Elaine stood, took a breath, and then extended a hand to Wolfe. He didn't shake it. Wolfe rarely does, but he nodded again, which in his world is practically a standing ovation. After she left, Wolfe resumed his seat and sighed. Deep, slow content. I let the quiet hold for a while, then asked the question that had been itching at me since Burris left the night before. "Who was it?" I asked. "In the pantry. Was it really Burris?" "No," Wolfe said. "He lacked the nerve. He arranged it. But he didn't come himself." "Then who?" "Carla done." I sat back. You're sure? She had the access, the timing, and the need. She feared Burris would drag her down, so she entered as a warning to us and to him. She hoped we would react without identifying her. Why didn't you call her out? Because she gave us what we needed, and because there is no need to punish survival when it leads to truth. I looked at him for a moment. You're getting soft, Wolfe. Nonsense, he said. I am preserving equilibrium. Miss Dunn will not test me again. Just then the phone rang. I answered. It was Saul. Final update, he said. The donor RV has been identified. A hedge fund manager named Roland Wexler. Heavy ties to pharmaceutical investments. He's distancing himself fast. His lawyers are spinning him as another uninformed participant. There is no evidence he ordered anything, just encouraged outcomes. Classic, I said. Thanks, Saul. I hung up and turned to Wolfe. Wexler's washing his hands. Of course he is, Wolfe replied. They always do. But even washed hands leave prints. That afternoon, Brewster sent a courier with a sealed envelope. Inside was a check generous, in Wolfe's definition of the word, and a handwritten note that simply said, "Thank you for restoring what we nearly lost." Wolfe read it once and placed it in the desk drawer. Then he turned to me. "It is finished." I wasn't so sure. Late that evening, as the last sunlight stretched across the parquet floor, Wolfe returned to the kitchen for his second dinner, and I sat in the office watching the city beyond the glass. I kept thinking about the moment Carla stepped through our door. The package, the note, the photograph, all of it just to draw us in. We'd been used. Not maliciously, maybe, but strategically. Wolfe had once said that being needed was no guarantee of being respected, but sometimes it was enough. When Fritz called us to the table, Wolfe arrived with the air of a man who'd just filed away the final page of a long book. Dinner was roast duck in orange sauce, with polenta and a braised cabbage side that deserved a parade. Wolfe gave it a nod of rare approval. Afterward, over coffee, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and said, "Appetite, Archie, is the only honest instinct. It cannot be bribed, only indulged. Everything else, ambition, reputation, loyalty, is theater." I gave him a look. So this whole case was what? A dress rehearsal? No, he said. It was an inevitable performance, one they all insisted on staging. And us. We were the audience. And the critics. He lifted his cup, took a sip, and added, "And as usual, the ones left holding the curtain." Then he went silent, the kind of silence that didn't invite questions. Outside, the night thickened. Inside, the brownstone settled, and for the first time in days, no one knocked at the door. The brownstone has a rhythm, one you don't notice until it's been thrown off. When it's working right, the sounds are predictable. Fritz's deliberate footsteps in the kitchen, the creak of Wolfe's chair as he leans back from a session with his orchids, and my typing or whistling, or arguing with the phone. But after a case like the Citadel Foundation, the rhythm doesn't snap back into place right away. It resumes like an orchestra coming out of a false rest, slow, cautious, a little uncertain, until the tempo finds itself again. The morning after Wolfe declared the matter finished, he didn't go to the plant rooms right away. That alone told me the aftershocks were still in his bloodstream. Instead, he sat longer than usual in his chair, not even pretending to read the Gazette. I didn't interrupt. Not until he gestured with 2 fingers toward the empty glass that usually held his morning beer. "Refill?" I asked. "Not beer," he said. "Brandy." At 10 in the morning, that was practically a shout. I got it and brought the glass in silence. He sipped it slowly, his eyes unfocused. Not dreaming, just reorganizing. Guilt is a disorder, he said, without preamble. It leaves no physical wound, but the infection is more persistent. Are we talking about Sloane? I asked. Wolfe gave me a small nod. Yes. He will recover. But he will never be immune again. And Carla, she will rise, higher than before, but differently. And Elaine, she will return. She will be mistrusted by some, admired by others, and forgotten by many. That is the cost of having been right. And Burris. Wolfe paused, then set his glass down. He will disappear. Not vanish, but recede. He will speak on ethics at conferences. He will write articles about leadership, and he will always avoid mirrors. I didn't press. I knew when Wolfe was doing post-mortems, not for the case, but for the players. He only does it when something about them still lingers in his mind. After breakfast, I headed to my office to draft the final summary of the case. Wolfe doesn't usually read my reports, but he always insists they be filed. He claims it's for accuracy. I think it's because he likes the idea of a record, even if it's mostly for my own amusement. At noon the phone rang. It was Lucien Brewster again. I wanted to thank you, he said. And Mr. Wolfe, we got your note. And the check. I assume he's already filed it. He doesn't file anything, I said. He instructs, I file. Brewster chuckled faintly. Then his voice turned somber. I've offered Elaine the oversight position. She's agreed, with stipulations. We're forming an internal ethics council, third party, neutral authority. Well, I said, that only took a scandal. Yes, Brewster replied. Sometimes integrity needs a crisis to find a home. That sounded like something he'd rehearse for a speech. But I let it slide. When I relayed the conversation to Wolfe, he didn't react. Not until I added one more thing. They're also scrapping the Regine Bio expansion. Withdrawing the funding. They're issuing a statement by Friday. That got a response. Wolfe didn't smile, but he allowed his shoulders to relax. Then we have accomplished something, he said. By mid-afternoon, the brownstone had returned to its normal operating conditions. Wolfe retreated to the plant rooms. Fritz began preparing lamb for dinner. I went out to pick up a few new books Wolfe had ordered, and detoured past the Citadel Foundation building on the way back. It looked the same from the outside. Polished, pristine, purposefully intimidating. But I noticed 2 security guards at the front entrance now instead of 1. And the woman at the reception desk was someone I hadn't seen before. Carla, it seemed, had begun implementing her version of post-crisis messaging, starting with new faces. I didn't go in, just watched for a moment, then moved on. Back at the house, Saul Panzer dropped by to deliver his final invoice and stay for coffee. Wolfe invited him into the office, where he recounted the tail end of his Geneva findings, most of which we already knew. But then Saul added one last detail. Elaine didn't just leave because of the report, he said. She left because she was followed. Twice. Once from her apartment, once from the foundation. Burris? I asked. Unlikely. Someone else. Elaine thought it might have been a subcontractor, one of the third-party data compliance vendors. She couldn't prove it, but it rattled her. Someone's trying to make her quit, I said. Or worse, Saul added. That sat in the air like a dropped coin. Wolfe's expression didn't change, but his fingers stopped steepling. He spoke softly. I had assumed her departure was preventative. It may have been defensive. You think she was in danger? No longer, Wolfe said. Now that the chain has broken. That was all. Saul left shortly after, with Fritz packing him a small satchel of duck roulette for his trouble. Wolfe nodded approvingly.
and we resumed the natural rhythm of the house. That night, after dinner, I poured us both brandy. Wolfe took him into the office, and sat in the dark with the window open, the evening breeze rustling the orchid leaves. "You ever think," I said, "what would have happened if Carla hadn't brought that package to the door?" "Yes," Wolfe replied. "Then we would not have been summoned, and someone else would have been ruined without recourse." "Would they have buried Elaine?" "They would have tried," Wolfe said. "But truth, Mr. Goodwin, is a poor corpse. It never stays buried well." I laughed. "I'll stitch that on a throw pillow." He allowed the corner of his mouth to rise barely. Then he raised his glass and said, "To equilibrium." I raised mine back. "To stubborn orchids and stolen coriander." That earned me a brief glance. The jar, of course, had been restored to its exact place, untouched since. Fritz claimed he wouldn't use it again until Wolfe allowed it, which might mean never. As the clock struck 10, Wolfe stood and turned toward the stairs. I finished the brandy, gathered the glasses, and checked the locks twice, by habit now. The brownstone was quiet. The city hummed outside like it always did. But inside, the rhythm had returned. Not because nothing had changed, but because we had found a way to let it change and stay standing. And that, when you work for Nero Wolfe, is about the best ending you can hope for.